Let's go to begin our series or part two of this idea. And so we're talking about relationships. Last week we talked about trust. And we're kind of unpacking different values when it comes to the idea of relationships. And today's value is going to be maybe a little bit different that you didn't think would actually be something that would be beneficial for you when it comes to your relationships. And today we're going to talk about a good word called conflict. And conflict is something that whether we like it or not, it's going to happen. How many of you ever heard the term, you've lost your edge? Anybody ever heard that term before? Like maybe a friend of yours says, hey man, you've kind of lost your edge a little bit. Like you're not as excited about life as you were. You're not as passionate. You've kind of lost your edge. You're not as sharp as you used to be. You've kind of lost the zeal and the passion, and really life is dull for you, or your marriage is dull. Maybe your marriage is dull, and it's not sharp, and it's not exciting. Maybe just different relationships that you have are dull, or your career's dull. You're just tired of the career you've chosen to be in. Or maybe your heart's dull. Maybe in here it's just dull. You're cynical, you're critical, you're judgmental about everything. You're constantly looking at somebody else's issue instead of looking at your own issue. You've lost passion, enthusiasm for life. And I really believe this as I was preparing for this message, that I really believe a lot of the dullness in life, the dull marriages, the dull relationships, really is one of the sources, I believe, of why we get to that place is mismanaged conflict. And when we mismanage conflict or we mismanage tension, we have a tendency to live in a place of unforgiveness or bitterness. And if you're living in a place where you've mismanaged conflict and you've lost your edge in your relationships, that you chose somewhere along the line in this life not to forgive. You chose somewhere along in this life to walk in bitterness. You became a person that was critical in your relationships. You became cynical. You became everything. You took everything personal. You've kind of taken that personal. You've not managed conflict correctly. Can I tell you that besides God, there's one constant that's going to happen in your life, and it's conflict. Ephesians chapter 6 tells us this is in your notes, which you can reference it if you like, that you were not, when you became a Christian, that you weren't dropped into an incubator like a little baby. You were dropped into a war zone. The Bible tells us in Ephesians chapter 6 that we've received armor, that we are to stand, and having done all to stand. I mean, we're in a war. He says, you wrestle not against flesh and blood. In other words, people's not your issue. The conflict of life, yes, you're going to have it. You're going to have the conflict. But at the end of the day, he says this, you're in a war. So there's a spiritual war, and sometimes those spiritual wars show up in our relationships. And if you mismanage conflict and you don't walk through conflict correctly, then you can have, in the day and age in which we live, it sometimes ends in destruction. I'm going to use Proverbs chapter 27, verse number 17 today out of the Passion Translation. It says this, it takes a grinding wheel to sharpen a blade. And so one person sharpens the character of another. So if you picture that, the grinding wheel that is going in this direction, and you apply a blade to it to sharpen the blade, there is pressure, there is friction, and what's created at the end of that is heat. Heat begins to through that process of tension and pressure, that it creates heat, which then begins to take the dullness of the blade and begins to sharpen the blade. That's what conflict is designed for. Friction is designed for something. If you ever see a piece of gold or gold in its purest form, it doesn't start there. It goes through a process. You take a piece of gold and you put it into the heat and the fire, and what happens within that piece of gold is the impurities rise to the top because of the pressure, because of the heat, because of the tension. And what happens, what they do is when the impurities rise to the top, they wipe those off and then they stick it back in the heat. There's a constant heat, conflict, tension that goes on to purify gold. God uses conflict to make you grow up a little bit. Oh, well, you guys good? Conflict is designed with something in mind. And listen, you determine whether you are strengthened by conflict or broken by it. You determine whether you are strengthened by conflict or you are broken by it. So a lot of times, here's what happens when conflict arises. We are tempted to do 5 things. The first thing that we're tempted to do when we're faced with conflict in relationships, whether it's your marriage, if things are dull, if it's your career, here's what we have the tendency to do. Number 1 is to dominate it. When we have conflict, there's people that want to dominate it. I said I'm the boss. Come on, somebody. You yell a lot, trying to get everybody in your house in order. I said, sit down, eat your green beans and your Brussels sprouts. And woman, make sure you get the dishes. You're yelling. Your yelling's creating conflict, folks, whether you realize this or not. You try to dominate it. You try to control it. The second way that when conflict arises, we're tempted to ignore it. You just leave it alone. You know, that passive. There's so many men that are very passive when it comes to conflict. Here's what I mean by that. We just want to kind of sweep it under the rug and hope it goes away. We just hope that issue fades away. That issue doesn't fade away. If you sweep it under the carpet, guess what? It's still under the carpet. So when it comes to conflict in your relationships, you can try to dominate it. You can try to ignore it. Number 3, you can whine about it. Make everybody else around you miserable because you're constantly fussing about the conflict. You talk about it constantly. Well, you know what you're going to do. My life is so bad, I can't stand it. It's just whiny, baby. Stick a pacifier in and shut up. Whining about the conflict. Life is so hard. Listen to me. You're not abnormal. Life is hard for everybody, whether you're sitting in an ivory tower, the success of a businessman, or you're a homeless guy under the bridge. Life is hard. Conflict happens. So stop whining about it. Amen. All right. I thought I was a student ministry for a minute. Number 4, we white flag it. What's white flag it mean? Peace at any price. We'll do anything. Peace at any price. And here's what we do. Instead of handling it, we go, you win. You win. You win. Now, early on in me and my wife's marriage, boy, that was one. That was one right there where we tried to force each other into that white flag moment. You know what I'm saying? Like she would say something, I'd one up her, she'd one up me back, and I'd one up her again, one up, until finally I'm just like, you know what? After 23 years of marriage, I got this, baby. We're good. I'm good. So white flag it is a way that we handle conflict. Or in our generation, here's the preferred choice of your generation, is to end it. Whatever relationship you're in or whatever the conflict is, you just want to end it. This has become an out in our generation. When marriage gets tough and relationships get tough, or our career gets tough, or do you realize that people are getting married later in life? You know why that is? It's because most people don't get married, they live together. Why do they live together? Because there's no commitment involved. No, I'm preaching. But that's kind of the societal way. Now, there's a lot of Jesus that can jump in there and fix things. But listen to me, is that we want to end things, so we look for easy ways out. Instead of saying, you know what, we have these issues. There's some stuff that's going on in our lives and in our relationships that need to be fixed. And I'm going to give you the key. How many today, if I could give you a key that would unlock every door in your relationships when it comes to conflict, you'd want that key today? All right, you ready? Okay, I hope so. James chapter 4, verse number 1. Here it is. I'm going to give you the key. You ready? Here's what James says. What is the cause of your conflicts and quarrels with each other? Doesn't the battle begin inside of you? You want the key? You want the key when it comes to conflict? Listen, he says, doesn't the battle begin inside of you as you fight to have your own way and fulfill your own desires? You still want the key? I'm going to keep going. You're jealous. Jesus. Let me read that off the screen for a minute. Holy cow. You jealously want what others have. Sorry. Back up, all of you. So you begin to see yourself as better than others. You scheme with envy and harm others to selfishly obtain what you crave. That's why you quarrel and fight. Have you ever thought about that your conflict is about selfishness? You And if you ask, you won't receive it, for you're asking with corrupt motives, seeking only to fulfill your own selfish desires. So if we're going to manage conflict, and not just manage it, not just get through it, not just walk through it. No, the first thing that we have to do, according to James chapter 4, verse number 1, is this. Number 1 is look within yourself. The key, I believe, to conflict and quarrels and handling conflict correctly and making sure that it's sharpening you, not breaking you, making sure that it's not dulling you, but it's sharpening you, is that you have to look within yourself. Whenever you're faced with a conflict in your marriage or in relationships, the first place you start is with you. He says it. He says, doesn't the battle begin inside of you as you fight to have your own way and fulfill your own desires? At the heart of conflict is an ability or a thought pattern or a mindset that says, I want my way. And most conflict, like when I do marriage counseling, it's just a bunch of, marriage counseling sometimes can be 45-year-olds acting like 2-year-olds. What do I mean by that? They're throwing temper tantrums about the other person. Well, you don't know what they've done. You know, this and that and the other. Wait a minute, buddy. When's the last time you stuck your finger out and stuck it in your chest and said, maybe there's something going on in here? Amen. I'm fired up. We had serve day yesterday. I laid 35 yards of mulch. I'm ready, not really by myself, but we did a lot yesterday, so amen. I'm fired up. Look within yourself. This is the last thing you want to do. Nobody wants to start with themselves. Adam didn't even start with himself. God comes to him and he says, what in the world did you do, Adam? I mean, seriously, bro. I gave you authority. I gave you dominion. You know, I gave you a wife. Like, you guys got to walk around naked. What more do you want? And Adam says this. In the middle of all that after sinning, he says, it's the woman you gave me. Like, he immediately directed the blame off of himself and put it on Eve. Well, God said, hold on, buddy. It didn't say the first. When you read in Hebrews, it talks about the first Adam. The reason we fell into sin was because of Adam, not because of Eve. A lot of times we think, well, it's Eve ate the fruit. The passive man was standing there watching his wife talk to a snake while eating apples. To me, that's the first sin, is passivity of a man. So here we go. He at the beginning begins to blame shift his wife. No, wait a minute. God says to Adam, they're walking in the cool of the day and they realize they're naked. And he starts sewing fig leaves together. And he puts on his Tarzan outfit for God. And God comes to him and he asks the question. He talks to Adam personally and says, who told you you were naked? Like, he goes personal right after him. What was God trying to do with Adam? Hey, buddy, don't blame it on Eve. Who told you you were naked? You need to start with you. You believed a lie somewhere in your relationship with your wife that caused you to cause the entire society to fall. Look within yourself. It's the last thing we want to do. The initial action in every conflict is to come up with the issue of the other person. That's every time. Every time. Instead of looking within ourselves. We think the cause is someone else. Now, if there's some serious sin issues going on and they've created havoc and they're making stupid decisions, I understand there's some of that. But at the same time, it takes two to tango. Let's start with us. Let's start looking within us. We judge ourselves by our intentions and others by their actions. Come on, let me say that again. We judge others by our intentions and others by their actions. Listen, whether we realize this or not, when it comes to looking within myself, the earth was never designed to fulfill all of your desires. Relationships, they were not designed to fulfill all your desires. They were not fulfilled to complete you. They're a part of God's plan for your life, but at the end of the day, it starts with Jesus and you. It starts with knowing that I'm complete in Him, not adding other people into the group. So if you don't know you're complete in Christ and you live from that place, your relationships are going to struggle. Because you're going to take offense, you're going to take it personal, you're going to get into this conflict thing, and you're not going to see it as a value that's pushing you to become better. You're going to see it as something that's trying to break you. conflict. Matthew chapter 7 says this. Look within yourself. Message Bible. Don't pick on people. Jump on their failures. Criticize their faults, unless, of course, you want the same treatment. The critical spirit has a way of boomeranging. Woo! Boomerangs. You critical, it's going to come back to you. I'm telling you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, craziness. It's easy to see a smudge on your neighbor's face. Another version says a speck. And be oblivious to the ugly sneer, or another version says plank on your own or in your eye. Do you have the nerve to say, let me wash your face for you, when your own face is distorted by contempt? It's this whole traveling road show mentality all over again. Playing a holier than thou part instead of just living your part. Wipe that ugly sneer off your own face, and you might be fit to offer a washcloth to your neighbor. Come on, somebody. Dear God. Come on. Start with you when it comes to conflict. Secondly, when you start with you, talk to God first. Talk to God first. Before you go to people, talk to God first. Have you ever read the Psalms like David, when in conflicts you experience frustration and different emotions. Have you ever read the Psalms and seen how David writes the Psalms? What he does when he writes a psalm is he starts with, God, I can't stand you. You've left me. You won't want nothing to do with me. I can't stand these people. And at the end of the Psalms, he said, Lord, I love you. You're the best thing in the world. I love people. I love Jesus. That's how David writes every song. Every psalm he writes starts with craziness. He starts with God. He starts to complain to God, not to people. He starts with God. Listen, you have to pursue God first. But in our society, listen to me, going to God is the last thing we do. In everything. God is a last resort. Emergency phone calls to heaven because I'm in a crisis. Listen to me, God says, why don't you prepare yourself by beginning to talk to me first. Learn to pause. Learn to pause. When I worked in student ministry and I also worked at a corrections facility, I was the activity coordinator, and I'd take these kids that were incarcerated out, trying to get them accustomed back to the real world there. They were incarcerated, and trying to get them to be viable assets to society. And I'd take them out like we'd go canoeing, or we'd go to the Neil Armstrong Museum, just different things that I set up for them to try to interact within society. And I told them, before we go out here, if any of you act crazy, it's immediate, 10 seconds to the ground, I'll be on top of you. You will not do, it doesn't matter where we're at. I basically had to physically restrain them in a legal training kind of way. And we'd get out here, and these kids, and I'll never forget, man, we were at the Neil Armstrong Museum, and this kid was acting out of control. And I told him, I said, look, man, bro, look, I told you before we got here, we got in public, you're going to act like a crazy man. I said, I'm going to give you one opportunity to do this right here, and I'd go. And he'd look at me and like crazy. I said, I'm going to give you one opportunity to pause. It's my pause button. Pause. Well, he didn't pause. There we are in the middle of the Neil Armstrong Museum, and there's people all around, families hanging out, looking at history, and there I am. Get down on the floor! Get down on the floor, and jump on him, physically restrain him right in front of him. Don't worry about us, we're good. Don't worry about us. This is all a part of the problem here. Force it into submission. When all he had to do in order to get what he wanted was simply learn how to pause. Control his reactions and actions in the moment in order for him to be successful in the program. Do you realize that when it comes to conflict, we have to learn to pause? We have to learn to go to God first. Philippians chapter 4, verse 6 and 7 says, do not be anxious about anything. Everybody say anything. Anxious about nada, nothing. But in every situation, by prayer and petition, he tells you how to respond to anxious moments. He tells you how to respond to conflicting moments. He says this, everything by prayer and petition. In other words, go to God first. With thanksgiving. When's the last time you were in conflict and you went to God with thanksgiving about that other person? Lord, I thank you so much for this. Jesus, I'm going to choke. Hey, thank you. They're so wonderful. It's like, when's the last time you went to God first He said, present your request to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding. In other words, when you go to God first and you do it with the right motive in the middle of conflict, God releases a peace in your life to deal with the situation. Proverbs chapter 18:13 says this, listen before you speak, for to speak before you've heard the facts will bring humiliation. James 1:19 says, take note of this, everyone should be quick to listen and slow to speak and slow to become angry. How do we become slow in the realm of conflict? How do we pause for a moment to evaluate the conflict in relationships? We go to God first. We look at ourselves, and then we take ourselves to God before we take ourselves to people. So we take ourselves to God. Number 3 is this, in managing conflict, is let God do a work in you. Notice the focus. You haven't even talked to the other person yet. You've looked at yourself, you've taken it to God first, and then let God do a work in you. Let God do a work in me. Do you realize that God uses conflict? God uses conflict. Conflict has an assignment. It amazes me that people pray to be used by God and want God to do some amazing things in their life. And God, I want to make a difference. I want to change the world. I want to be a world changer. And God, you call me to make difference. You want me to do this. You want me to do that. And they pray for God to give them a call to do something. And then the first opposition, they're like, God, that's not you. No. Nope. The first conflict, God, no, it's not you. And so what we try to do is we try to pray away the conflict, but we invited ourselves into the moment to say, God, help us make a difference. But then when conflict is presented, we try to pray the conflict away. Listen to me, conflict has an assignment. It's coming with intention. Conflict has an assignment. God doesn't tempt us, but he does test you. Come on, he doesn't tempt you, but he does test you. And the crazy thing about God's test is if you fail him, you can take them again. You can't move past levels until you pass them. I had a guy I worked with a long time ago. His name was Roger, and when I worked in corrections, and I'll never forget, this dude got under my skin and very irritating to me, and we worked together, and I seen him 8 to 9 hours a day, and this guy got under my skin, and it was constant. I was constantly frustrated. I hate going to work. I was just struggling with this dude, and I'd go in, I'd sit in his office, and he would blah, 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 try to control, things like that. And I don't forget, I was driving home from work one day, and I said, God, can I tie that man up and never see him again? Like, just put him in a closet or something. And God said, everybody needs a Roger in their life. When I was driving home, I was like, God, what are you talking about? I mean, we're tension. We're constantly going at each other, and his way is different than my way, and I want to do it this way, and he wants to do it this way, and we're constantly at tension, and conflict, and God says everybody needs a Roger in their life. In other words, that conflict has an assignment. It has nothing to do with Roger, Jason. It has everything to do with developing you. Conflict has an assignment. Conflict is intention to develop you. Conflict is designed to develop you. So you can't pray it away. You can't put it under the rug. You must walk headfirst into the conflict after you've asked God anything about yourself. You've taken it to God first. And then you say to God, God, do a work in me. 1 Peter 1:6-7 says this, so be truly glad. There is a wonderful joy ahead. Even though the going is rough for a while down there, these trials are only a test to your faith to see whether or not it's strong and pure. It is being tested as fire tests gold and purifies it. And your faith is far more precious to God than mere gold. So if your faith remains strong after being tried in the test tube of fiery trials, it will bring you much praise and glory and honor on the day of his return. In other words, let God do a work in you. Let him purify you through conflict. Take a moment and ask yourself this morning, God, is there anything within me? David prayed that prayer all the time. God, is there anything within me? I ask you to purge me. I ask you to cleanse me. If there's any selfish motives in me, God, I ask that you would heal me. I ask, God, that wherever that's coming from, you would do a work in me. And when it comes to our relationships, that we don't move in the conflict with reactive behavior. Reactive behavior can bring destruction. But if we learn to take a moment and we learn to pause and let God do a work in us, all of a sudden we can navigate conflict where it doesn't break you, but it builds you. It makes you into something much better. You know, guys that go to the military, they go to the boot camps. They go to boot camp, and the goal is to, train them, but to break them all the way down. Break them down to the point of emotion where they change their hair, they change their clothes, and all of a sudden now you're in the Army, man. You're in the Marines, and your life is not your own any longer, that you're running by a code and a conduct. And at that boot camp, they break them all the way down through conflict, not through, hey guys, you want to go for ice cream today? Let's go. All the cadets line up. We're going to go down to Dairy Queen, and this is part of your training. No. They stick you out in the middle of nowhere. They make you sweat. They make you go early in the morning. They make you go without food. They work you hard. Why? Because conflict builds you. It trains you. It tests you. And number 4 is this. If you're going to navigate conflict correctly, don't expect from man what should only come from God. If you are going to navigate conflict correctly, don't expect from man what should only come from God. If you're looking for man to fulfill you, if you're looking for man to fill your heart, if you're looking for man for affirmation, if you're looking for the approval of man and attaboys, if you're looking all around from the things from man that should only come from God, God has a plan for you. Listen, lower your expectations of people and raise your expectations of God. You have frustration and tensions because your expectation of a person that is sin-filled, that is broken, that has been through a process themselves, you're setting this expectation up here and you're putting God down here. That's why you don't handle conflict well. That's why you don't manage frustration well, and stress and anxiety is because you got it flipped. Lower the expectation of man. You don't look down upon man, but at the same time, listen, we're all in the same boat. Too much is forgiven, much is required. I mean, we're all in this together. But man, if you put man at the pedestal of your life and God down here, and your expectation is all man-driven, guess what? You're constantly going to navigate conflict wrong. You will take it personal. You will see yourself as blemished. You will see as if you're the problem all the time. There's just this constant issue. No, hold on. Lower that a little bit of man and raise it of God, and start to expect from God what God can give. Don't expect from man what only God can give you. God's the one that gives you peace. If you need 7 people around you to fulfill peace, to feel tranquility, to feel no fear. If you need 5 people around you for that, then you got your expectations in the wrong place. Man was never designed to complete you. Don't expect from man what should only come from God. Psalm 33:22 says this, "May your unfailing love be with us, Lord, even as we put our hope in you," listen, "alone." When it comes to conflict, we put our trust, our hope in Him alone. We take our conflict first. We look within ourselves. Then we talk to God first. Then we let God do a work in us. That way we're not reactive, and we take time to pause, and we get His heart on the situation. We get His heart on us. If there's stuff that we need to change within us, that we make those changes. We realize conflict comes with an assignment, that God wants to develop us and work through us and mold us and to make us. And finally, we expect God to do what God does, not man to do what God is supposed to do. We close our eyes this morning across this place. If you're in here today and man, you've navigated conflict wrong, maybe something in this message, you're like, man, how in the world? I've been navigating this thing wrong the whole time. Maybe you've been selfish in your conflict. Maybe you're just selfish. We all are. We all start with somebody else when it comes to conflict. What if we looked within ourselves and said, am I causing anything? Is an issue with me? Do I need to take something to God today? What we're going to do just for a couple seconds here, a couple minutes here, what we're going to do is I'm going to invite you that if you say today, man, there's some stuff that I just want to let go of, that I've been carrying around when it comes to people. And I've lowered my expectations of God and raised my expectations of people. that today what we're going to do is, as we stand in just one moment, I want to invite you to the front. You're like, man, that's a little weird. It ain't weird. I'm not going to bite you. It's just a point of contact that lets us come together and pray together. Maybe you need to come to each side of the platform today and just find a spot and say, if there's anything within me, God, that you need to deal with, I ask you to deal with it this morning in me, that when I leave this place, I will turn to you from now on. I will look to myself to see if there's something in me, and then I will take it to you and ask you to do a work in me. So can we all stand this morning? We're going to sing this. And as we do, if that's you, you say, man, I want prayer for that today. I just want you to move out of your seats. Come up here to the front with me, and we want to pray for you.